Y'all come on in now. Pull up a chair and get comfortable. The fire is warm and the night is long, just right for a story. Some stories live in books. Others get passed down, whispered through the years, like wind moving through the trees. But the best ones never die. They just wait for someone to listen. The quilt had been meant for warmth. Sewn by careful hands beneath the soft glow of an oil lamp, its squares cut from old dresses, flour sacks, and worn shirts. The cloth stitched together by women who whispered prayers with every pull of the needle. A gift for the soldiers, for the valley sons who had gone off to war, carried away by duty and the promise that they would return. But the quilt had returned first, and it had come back covered in blood. Eleanor sat at the wooden table, the quilt spread across her lap. The fabric, once soft and clean, was stiff in places, stained deep with something that would never wash out. Her hands trembled as she ran her fingers over the stitches. She had made this quilt, had pieced it together with her own hands, had traced her son's initials into the corner with careful embroidery, had packed it into a wagon bound for the front lines along with baskets of food, tin cups of hot broth, jars of blackberry preserves, things meant to bring comfort to the men who slept in cold fields beneath empty skies. And now it was the only thing that had come back to her. The man who had returned it had not known her son's name, had not known which soldier it had belonged to, only that it had been found in the aftermath of battle, wrapped around a man as if someone had tried in those last moments to give him warmth. He had pressed the bundle into her arms, offered his condolences in a voice rough with weariness, then mounted his horse and rode away, leaving her standing in the middle of the dirt road, the quilt clutched to her chest. That had been 3 days ago. Since then, she had barely moved from the chair by the hearth, had barely spoken, had barely breathed. She simply sat there, staring down at the quilt, waiting for it to tell her something she did not already know. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering light across the cabin walls. The clock ticked slow on the mantel. Outside, the wind stirred through the trees, whispering against the window panes. She exhaled softly, and then, with slow, trembling hands, she lifted the quilt to her face. The scent of smoke and sweat and earth still clung to the fabric, and something else, something faint, something achingly familiar. Her son. A sob rose in her throat, sudden and sharp, her body curling over the quilt as if she could still hold him there, as if she could gather up the pieces of what was left and stitch them back together. She wept until there was nothing left in her but silence. And then a sound, software, faint, not the wind, not the fire, something else. Her breath stilled as she lifted her head. The candle on the table flickered, the air in the room shifted, heavy with something she could not name. And then, just beyond the glow of the firelight, a figure. Her heart pounded as she blinked, her vision blurred with tears. Number. It couldn't be, and yet he stood, not whole, not as she remembered, but there. His face was pale, his uniform torn, his hair still dusted with the dirt of a battlefield far from home. He did not speak, only looked at her, his eyes filled with something deep, something sorrowful, something that stretched beyond time itself. A moment passed, then another, then, barely above a whisper, "Mama." Her breath caught. She reached out, fingers trembling, but the candle flickered and he was gone. The wind howled through the eaves. The fire snapped, sending tiny embers curling into the air. She sat there for a long time, staring at the empty space where he had stood. Then, with hands steadier than before, she folded the quilt, pressing it close to her chest. She knew now. Her son was gone, but he had come home all the same. If this story spoke to you, if you felt the echoes of the past in its words, I invite you to stay a little longer. Like this video, subscribe, and join me as we continue weaving stories of history, home, and the hearts that lived before us. Your support keeps these stories alive. Thank you for being here.